Advanced heart failure is becoming more and more common in America, and our medical technology companies are actually coming up with a lot of devices that are helping patients live longer who have advanced heart failure. So patients who are not transplant candidates could actually benefit from durable VADs or ventricular assist devices. And one example of this is going to be the HeartMate3, which Abbott Medical puts out. And I'm just going to quickly go through the components of that. So in this diagram, you see 4 different components of the HeartMate. Number 1 being the actual HeartMate, which is attached to the heart, as you can see there. Number 2 are going to be 2 battery packs, which provide 17 hours of continuous battery life for these patients. They also have charging devices at home with extra battery packs that can be swapped out. Number 3 is going to be your modulator drive line, which connects your system controller, which is number 4, to the actual internal portion that goes through the abdomen and eventually goes through the diaphragm and connects to the HeartMate device. So here in this anatomical depiction, you can see the part that goes on the apex of the left ventricle, and this is what Abbott describes or calls their maglev technology, which is basically a floating rotor which spins to suck blood out from the left ventricle, and then ejects it through this cannula, which you can see comes back into the aorta, and then the amount of speed or RPM that we have sucking this blood out is basically determining the cardiac output that ejects this blood into the aorta and then systemically to the rest of the body. Now, this newer technology of the maglev rotation basically helps create large blood flow patterns, which reduces any sharing stress to blood that's passing through that. And also it has this intrinsic pulsatility properties to it, which reduces any stasis as well as the risk for thrombus formation. Now here's the display device that you get on kind of like a tablet that shows you the different parameters that are involved with the HeartMate. And the one thing that we can control is the speed, which you see on top. So the recommended speeds for the HeartMate3 are anywhere between 4,800 and 6,000. And when patients first come out on the HeartMate, we usually start at a lower RPM. And then over the course of the postoperative day 1 and 2, we'll start to ramp that up. The things that we're looking for in terms of adequacy of the RPM is end organ perfusion, which we normally monitor with urine output as well as lactate levels. Now, when you're up titrating the RPM, you'll typically do it under echo guidance, because the downside of going up too quickly on the RPMs is you can start emptying out the left ventricle too quickly, and you may start to see your intraventricular septum start bowing into your left ventricle, which could cause the right side of the heart to fail. Your right ventricle basically relies on the intraventricular septum to stay sort of bowed into the right ventricle, so that as the free wall of the right ventricle contracts, it has a bit of a backboard to sort of squeeze against. So if that intraventricular septum starts bowing to the left side, you lose that backboard for the right ventricle, and then you may start to see RV failure. Now, the flow is a calculated value based on the speed and power, and if the speed is high and the power is high, then your flow is going to ultimately be high as well. And the power, which is displayed in watts, is basically the power that it takes for the device to achieve the RPM that you have set for it. And lastly, your pulsatility index, or the PI that's at the bottom here, is going to correspond to variations in power and fluctuations in flow throughout your circuit. And sometimes when you start to see an increase in your pulsatility index, that could just be because the patient's left ventricle is recovering and is starting to contract more. And now the heart and the HeartMate is starting to see different variations in its flow and its power, and that's why your pulsatility index is now getting wider. All patients who end up getting LVADs will end up spending a few days in the ICU as they just recover postoperatively, but then ultimately they will recover and go home with education, and basically be able to live their lives that they otherwise would not have. And the results are actually looking pretty good in terms of extending patients' lives in the realm of years that they potentially would not have had if they didn't have this type of intervention for them. So be on the lookout for more medical devices like this that are coming out as heart failure becomes much more prevalent. But in the meantime, HeartMate3 is one of the main options that we use for left ventricular assist devices.